My name is Sheila Reeves. I am 30 years old. I own a home on the Mornington Peninsula, a business I built from nothing, and a gate with a camera. And right now, my mom is standing outside that gate in the rain, crying. I haven't spoken to her in 8 years. I'm watching her on my iPad, both of them, Mom and Dad, huddled at the intercom in their good coats, the ones they wear when they want to look like they still have something. Behind them, slightly off to the side like she doesn't want to be seen, is my sister, Emily. She's the reason I left. Not directly, but in every way that matters, yes, her. 8 years ago, I was 22, sleeping in the back bedroom of our family home in Dandenong, paying my share of the bills, studying at night, working weekends at a cafe so I didn't have to ask for anything. Emily had just moved her boyfriend in. His name was Hunter Mendez, and the first week he was there, he went through my shelf in the fridge and ate my food, and when I said something about it at dinner, he laughed. That was the beginning. What came after, I'll get to that. What matters right now is what happened the night it ended. Hunter was drunk. I came home late from a shift and he blocked the hallway, got in my face, said things I won't repeat. When I tried to get past him, he shoved me hard into the doorframe. My shoulder hit the timber. I cried out. Dad was in the living room. He heard everything. He didn't move. Mom came to the hallway, looked at me on the floor, looked at Hunter, and said, and I will never forget this as long as I live, Sheila, what did you do now? Not to him, to me. Dad picked up my suitcase from the hallway, set it by the front door, and opened it without a word, like I was a package being returned. Emily stood at the top of the stairs and didn't move a muscle. She just pulled the door shut. I packed a bag that night. I left with $60 in my account and a bruise on my shoulder that turned green by morning. No one called to check on me. Not that night, not the next week, not ever. So I stopped waiting for them to. I couch surfed. I finished my degree anyway. I started a property staging business with borrowed equipment and a second-hand van. I failed twice and started again twice, and on the third go, it caught. Properly caught. By 27, I had a team. By 29, I had this house, 5 bedrooms, a deck that faces the bay, and that gate with the camera. The gate I have not opened. The intercom buzzes again. Dad's voice comes through, quieter than I ever heard it growing up. The man who ran every room he ever walked into now sounds like he's asking permission to breathe. Sheila, please, we just need 5 minutes. 5 minutes after 8 years of nothing. I pick up the intercom handset. I keep my voice steady because I've had 8 years to practice being steady. Why are you here? Silence. Then Mum, and her voice breaks on the first word, which is the first time I've ever heard her voice break, says, Emily's in serious trouble, love. We didn't know where else to go. I look at the screen. Emily is staring straight into the camera, not crying, not begging, just staring. And something in her face, something I've never once seen there in 30 years of knowing her, stops me cold. She looked scared, not of what I might say, not of the rain or the cold, scared of something that had followed her here, something she'd brought to my gate along with everything else. I hadn't opened the gate, but I was still holding the handset, and that was already more than they deserved. I opened the gate, not because I forgave them, not because Mum's voice cracking wore me down. I opened it because of Emily's face. That look, and because whatever had followed my sister here, I needed to know what it was before I decided what to do with it. They came up the driveway slowly, like they weren't sure the ground would hold them. Dad had aged more than 8 years' worth. His hair had gone fully white, and he moved with a stiffness in his hip he was trying to hide. Mum kept her eyes on the path, not on me.
Emily walked last, a step behind both of them, and she still hadn't said a single word. I stood at the front door and did not hug them. I didn't step aside either, not straight away. I just looked at the three of them standing on my porch in the rain and felt something cold and clear settle in my chest. "Shoes off," I said, and walked inside. I put the kettle on because it gave my hands something to do. They filed into the kitchen, my kitchen, with its stone bench top and the bay view through the window, and I watched them take it in, watched Mum's eyes move across the room. She didn't say anything about it, but I saw her jaw tighten, and I knew what that meant. It meant she hadn't expected this, hadn't expected me to have built something this real. Good. Dad sat at the table like a man waiting to be sentenced. Emily stayed near the doorway, arms wrapped around herself, eyes on the floor. "Start talking," I said. No preamble, no small talk about how long it had been or how much things had changed. We all knew how long it had been. Mum reached across the table and put her hand near mine, not on it, near it, and said, "Hunter's in prison, Sheila." The kettle clicked off. Steam curled up toward the range hood. I didn't move. For what? Dad cleared his throat. Fraud and assault. A pause. He'd been doing it for years, apparently. Business partners, clients. When it finally caught up with him, the AFP raided the house. I looked at Emily. She was still staring at the floor. Her hands, I noticed, weren't right. They were shaking slightly, the way hands do when someone's been running on adrenaline for too long and the crash is coming. "Emily," I said, "look at me." She did. And up close, under my kitchen light, she looked nothing like the Emily I grew up with, the one who had everything arranged perfectly, the right boyfriend, the right job, the right way of standing in a room so that everyone else felt slightly less than her. That woman was gone. What was sitting in my kitchen looked hollowed out. "Are you being investigated too?" She shook her head. "No, but the accounts are frozen. Everything we had together, the savings, the joint mortgage, all of it. I can't access any of it while the case is running. It could be months." "And Mum and Dad?" Dad answered that one, quietly, without meeting my eyes. "We put the house as surety for one of Hunter's loans. 2 years ago, he said it was a formality, that it would never be called in." I set 3 mugs down on the bench, poured the tea, kept my back to them for a moment longer than necessary because I needed that moment. Hunter Mendez, the man who shoved me into a doorframe while my parents sat in the next room, the man Emily chose, the man they all chose, over me. He spent years conning everyone around him, and when it fell apart, the rubble landed on the people who trusted him most, including the people who threw me out to make room for him. I turned around and put the mugs on the table. "So you've lost the house." Dad nodded. "And you need somewhere to stay." Mum finally looked up at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed and her mascara had tracked down her cheek, and she looked, for the first time I could remember, genuinely ashamed. "Yes," she said. I sat down across from them, wrapped both hands around my mug, let the silence sit for a long moment, not to be cruel, but because the answer I was forming in my head needed to be right. Not just for them, for me. "I'm going to need you to do something first, before I decide anything." 3 eyes on me, waiting. I hadn't decided yet whether what I was about to ask for was justice, or just the beginning of something much harder than any of us were ready for.
I didn't make them wait long. I'm not interested in dragging things out for sport. That's not what this is. I set my mug down and looked at the 3 of them. Mum with her hands folded tight in her lap, Dad staring at the grain of my kitchen table, Emily still wrapped around herself like she was trying to take up as little space as possible, and I said what I'd been forming in my head since the moment they walked through my door. "I want you to say what happened, out loud, all of it, the night I left." Mum flinched. Dad's jaw moved like he was chewing something he couldn't swallow. Emily closed her eyes. "That's the condition," I said. Not an apology, not a sorry if you felt hurt. What actually happened,
in plain language from each of you. Then I'll decide." Nobody spoke for a long time. Rain tapped against the window. Somewhere out on the bay, a boat horn sounded, low and far away. Dad went first. I think he knew that if he didn't, no one would. Dad went first. I think he knew that if he didn't, no one would. "Hunter put his hands on you," he said. His voice was flat, controlled, the voice of a man reading a statement he'd rehearsed just enough to get through it. "You fell. You cried out. I heard it from the living room, and I didn't come." He stopped there. I waited. "Why not?" He looked up at me then, first time since they'd sat down. His eyes were wet, which I had never seen in my life, and it should have softened something in me, but it didn't. Not yet. "Because Emily asked me not to get involved. She said you'd provoked him." I believed her. The room went very still. I turned to Emily slowly. She already had tears running down her face, but she didn't look away. I'll give her that. Whatever she'd lost in the last few months, she hadn't lost the ability to hold my gaze. "You told them I provoked him." Not a question. She nodded once. "Why?" She pressed her lips together. When she finally spoke, her voice came out thin and cracked at the edges. "Because I was scared of what would happen to him if Dad stepped in. Because I loved him, and I was stupid, and I chose him over you, and I have thought about it every single day since." I sat with that, really sat with it. 8 years of wondering if they even knew what they'd done, and now here it was, the answer, plain and ugly, right on my kitchen table. She'd known. She'd known exactly what she was doing. Mum went last. She didn't give me a speech. She just said, very quietly, "I called you difficult when you needed me to protect you. I will never stop being ashamed of that." I stood up, took my mug to the sink, looked out at the bay for a moment. Gray water, gray sky, the kind of afternoon that feels like it's holding its breath. Then I turned around. "There are 2 spare rooms. You and Dad take the one at the end of the hall, Emily the one facing the garden. You stay for as long as it takes to sort out what's next, but there are rules, and the rules are mine, and if anyone breaks them, I won't argue about it. You'll just go." Mum made a sound that wasn't quite words. Dad nodded, slow and careful. Emily looked at me like she was waiting for a condition inside the condition, like she knew me well enough to know I wouldn't leave it there. She was right. "There's one more thing," I said. "Something I need from you specifically, Emily, not as a punishment, as proof." She paled, because she already knew, or suspected, what I was about to ask, and so did I. I just hadn't decided yet if I actually had the stomach to go through with it.
I'd known about Tasha for 2 years before any of this happened. Tasha Nguyen. She'd worked with Hunter at his firm in South Yarra. She was 24 when he started. He was 31, already engaged to Emily, already charm and confidence all the way to the surface. By the time Tasha figured out what she was dealing with, he'd borrowed money from her, $11,000, a personal loan between colleagues, he'd said, and she'd never seen a cent of it back. She'd also reported the assault to HR and been quietly moved to a different team, which everyone at the firm understood to mean she was the problem, because that's how it works when the man in question is producing results and smiling at the right people. I knew about Tasha because she'd found me, 2 years ago, a DM out of nowhere. "Are you related to Emily Reeves, who is with Hunter Mendez?" And when I said yes, she told me everything. We met for coffee in the city once. She was quiet and precise, and she'd kept records of everything, every transfer, every message, every HR complaint. She wasn't looking for drama. She was looking for someone who might one day be in a position to help her be heard. I had kept her number ever since. So when I looked at Emily across my kitchen table and said, "There's one more thing," this is what I meant. There's a woman named Tasha. You know who she is. Emily's face didn't move, but her hands did. They tightened in her lap. Hunter borrowed money from her and never paid it back. He also made her working life hell when she tried to report him. She has documentation of all of it, and she's been trying to get it included in the AFP investigation, but she's been told it falls outside the scope of the fraud case. I paused. You were there, Emily. You were at that firm's Christmas party when it started. You saw things. You told me once, before everything, that you didn't like how he talked to the younger staff. A long silence. You want me to make a statement, Emily said, not a question, flat, like she'd already been half expecting it. I want you to tell the truth about what you witnessed, not for me, for her. She lost money, she lost her standing at that job, and she spent 2 years trying to get someone to listen. Mum made a small noise. I looked at her. Don't, I said quietly. I know what you're about to say, that it'll complicate things legally, that it's not the right time. But there's never the right time to do the thing that costs you something. Emily knows that better than anyone now. Emily was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Dad shifted in his chair and the boat horns sounded again out on the bay, and I started to think she was going to say no. Then she said very quietly, "I'll do it. I should have done it years ago." Something shifted in the room. Not warmth exactly, more like pressure releasing, the way the air changes right before a storm breaks. I nodded once, pulled out my phone and sent Tasha a message, just 3 words. She'll talk. Call me. Then I stood up and told them where the towels were kept and that dinner was at 7 and that the Wi-Fi password was on the fridge. Ordinary things, the language of a house where people live. I wasn't sure yet what any of this made us. Not a family again, not close to it, but something. Some arrangement with the possibility of becoming something else if everyone held up their end. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that Tasha's call when it came 2 hours later wasn't just about a statement. She'd found something, inside Hunter's case files, something the AFP had overlooked or hadn't connected yet, something that had a name on it that made my stomach drop when she said it out loud. My name.
Tasha called at 8:30. I was in the study with the door shut, my family eating dinner on the other side of the wall, the sound of cutlery and careful conversation coming through like something from a different life. I picked up on the second ring. "Sheila, I need you to stay calm when I tell you this." Those are never good opening words. "Tell me," I said. She'd been going through the case documents her solicitor had managed to access, the parts of the AFP file that become available once charges are laid. Hunter's fraud had tentacles everywhere, fake invoices, ghost contractors, shell accounts. Most of it traced back to his firm, but tucked inside one of the shell company structures, listed as a silent investor in a property deal that had gone badly sideways 18 months ago, was a name. Sheila M. Reeves. An ABN registered in my name, a bank account I'd never opened, 2 property transactions I'd never authorized. The whole thing constructed so cleanly that if you didn't know me, you'd assume I was a willing participant in a scheme that cost 3 other investors a combined $400,000. I sat very still in my chair. "How long has this been in the file?" Tasha said. "At least 14 months, which means the AFP has had your name sitting in a fraud investigation for over a year and no one has contacted you." "Or they were building to it," I said. She didn't answer that. She didn't need to. I knew exactly how Hunter had gotten my details. 8 years ago, when I still lived at home, my documents were in a filing cabinet in Dad's study, birth certificate, tax file number, a copy of my passport. The kind of things a 22-year-old doesn't think to take when she leaves in a hurry with a bruised shoulder and $60. Hunter had moved into that house within weeks of me leaving. He'd had years of access to everything with my name on it. He'd used me. Even after I was gone, he'd found a way to use me. I pressed the heel of my hand against my sternum and breathed. "I need a solicitor," I said. Tasha said, "I know one. She's good. She dealt with identity fraud before she moved into civil litigation. Her name is Elizabeth Harriet. I can send you her number right now." "Send it." After I hung up, I sat in the dark for a while, not panicking, something colder than panic, the kind of focused anger that doesn't waste itself on noise. Hunter was already in a cell. He couldn't touch me directly, but whatever he'd built in my name was still sitting in a federal case file, and I had no idea yet how deep it went, or what it would cost me to get my name out of it cleanly. I had built everything I had on my name being clean. My name was the whole thing. I thought about walking back into the kitchen and telling them, watching Emily's face when she found out what the man she'd protected, the man she'd chosen over her own sister, had done even after I was gone. But I didn't. Not yet. I wanted to speak to Elizabeth Harriet first. I wanted to know exactly what I was dealing with before I handed anyone in that dining room the power to react to it. Information is only useful when you control who has it and when. I'd learned that the hard way. I texted Elizabeth Harriet at 9 that night. She replied at 9:17, not an assistant, her. "Can you come to my office tomorrow at 10? Bring everything you have and anything you can find tonight. Don't speak to anyone from the AFP without me present." I wrote back, "I'll be there." Then I went back to the kitchen. Mum had washed the dishes. Dad was watching the news with the volume low. Emily was sitting at the table with a cup of tea going cold in front of her, staring at nothing. She looked up when I came in. "Is everything okay?" I looked at my sister, the woman who had once closed a door on me, who had sat across this table this morning and said she'd thought about it every single day. "Fine," I said. "Get some rest." I wasn't ready to tell her yet, but I could feel the moment coming, the one where I'd have to decide whether she was someone I brought this into with me or someone I handled it around. Those are two very different things, and I wasn't sure yet which one she'd earned.
Elizabeth Harriet's office was on the 14th floor of a building on Collins Street. The kind of address that says, "We win before you've asked a single question." Her assistant met me at the lift, offered me water, and told me Elizabeth was just finishing a call. I sat in a chair by the window and looked down at the city moving below and tried to remember the last time I'd felt genuinely scared. It had been a long time. I'd worked hard to make sure of that. Elizabeth came out at 10:05. She was in her 50s, small and precise, with reading glasses pushed up on her head, and the kind of handshake that tells you a person has been underestimated their entire career and decided early on to make that everyone else's problem. "Sheila, sit down. Tell me everything in order, not the emotional version, the factual one. We'll get to the emotional version later if we need it." I liked her immediately. I told her everything in order. The night I left home at 22, the documents I'd left behind, Hunter moving in, the identity structure Tasha had found in the case file, the ABN, the bank account, the 2 property transactions. I laid it out clean, and she took notes without interrupting once. When she finished, she set her pen down and looked at me over the top of her glasses. "The good news is that the identity fraud will be provable. Your whereabouts at the time of both transactions are traceable. Your business records, your lease agreements, your tax returns. You were operating a legitimate company. There's a paper trail 8 years long that shows exactly who you are and what you've been doing. None of it overlaps with what he built in your name. And the bad news? She folded her hands on the desk. The bad news is that extracting your name from a live federal investigation takes time. The AFP won't simply accept our word for it. We'll need to make a formal submission, provide documentation, potentially have you interviewed under caution, which I will be present for, and which you will not attend without me. In the meantime, your name sits in that file. How long? If we move quickly and the AFP cooperates, 3 months. If they drag their feet, 6, possibly more. 6 months with my name attached to a fraud case. 6 months where any due diligence check on my business, any new client, any bank could pull that thread and find it. I had built everything I had on my name being clean. My name was the whole thing. Elizabeth said something. She turned her laptop around to face me. On the screen was a document, a statutory declaration, already partially drafted. One of the other investors caught up in Hunter's scheme has a solicitor who is building a separate civil claim. His name is Dennis Chavez. He lost $180,000 in one of the transactions made under your name. His solicitor has been in touch with my office this morning. I stared at the screen. He thinks I'm involved? He thought so, yes, until this morning when I sent his solicitor your business records going back 7 years. He's now reconsidering. Reconsidering? I repeated. He wants to meet you, Elizabeth said carefully. He's angry and he's lost a significant amount of money, and he wants to look the person whose name is on those documents in the face. I told his solicitor I'd put it to you. I thought about Dennis Chavez, a man I'd never met who'd lost everything he'd put into a deal that my name was forged across the top of it. He had every right to be angry. So did I. Maybe we had more in common than either of us knew yet. Set it up, I said. Elizabeth nodded and made a note. Then she looked up at me with an expression that was almost, not quite, but almost sympathetic. One more thing, Sheila, and I need you to hear this clearly. I waited. Your sister's statement to the AFP, the one about Hunter's conduct at the firm, will strengthen our case significantly. It establishes his pattern of exploiting people close to him. But if Emily gives that statement, Hunter's defense team will come after her, hard. Are you prepared for what that does to your household? My household. 3 people I hadn't spoken to in 8 years, sleeping in my spare rooms, eating at my table. I drove home thinking about what Elizabeth had asked me, whether I was prepared for what came next. When I pulled into my driveway, Emily was sitting on the front step, waiting, like she already knew something had shifted, like she could feel it from wherever she was. It was time to tell her, and I still didn't know how she was going to take it.
She was still in her pajamas. That was the first thing I noticed. Emily, who used to iron her clothes the night before, who never left her bedroom in anything less than put together, sitting on my front step in gray track pants and an oversized jumper, arms around her knees, bare feet on the cold stone. I parked and sat in the car for a moment watching her. Then I got out. She looked up when she heard the door. "Where did you go?" I said. "Solicitor," I said. I sat down on the step beside her. Not close, but close enough. The bay was flat and silver this morning. A pair of pelicans moved across the water so slowly they barely seemed real. We sat there for a moment without speaking, and I thought about all the ways there were to say what I needed to say, and none of them felt right. So I just said it plainly. Hunter used my identity. He registered a business in my name, opened bank accounts, put me on paper as an investor in property deals that were part of his fraud. He used documents he accessed from Mom and Dad's house, my documents. the ones I left behind the night I left. Silence. Emily didn't move, didn't make a sound. I watched her from the side, watched something travel across her face that I couldn't name exactly. It wasn't surprise. It was something closer to the specific horror of a person who was hearing a thing they half knew, but had buried deep enough to avoid dealing with. My name has been sitting in a federal fraud investigation for over a year. My business is at risk, my reputation, everything I built. Emily pressed both hands flat on her knees. Her voice when it came was very quiet. I didn't know he did that. I know, I said, and I did know. Whatever Emily had done, whatever she'd chosen, I didn't think she'd known about this. Sheila, let me finish. She closed her mouth. Your statement to the ASP, the one about his conduct with Tasha and the other staff, it helps my case. It establishes who he is and how he operates. But if you give it, his defense will come after you. They'll dig through everything, every message, every argument, every moment you looked the other way. And you'll have to sit with all of that in a room full of people and hold your ground. I stopped. Let that land. I'm not telling you to scare you out of it. I'm telling you because you need to know exactly what you're walking into before you decide. No pressure from me. That's not how I want this. Emily turned to look at me, properly look at me, the way she hadn't since they'd arrived. Her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying. She looked exhausted in the deep way, not tired from a bad night, but tired from years of carrying something too heavy for one person. You protected me, she said. I told you what you needed to know. No, you protected me, even now, after everything. Her voice cracked on the last word. I didn't do that for you. 8 years ago, I could have said something and I didn't, and you ended up alone. And I have lived with that every single day, and I am so sorry, Sheila. I am so sorry. The pelicans landed on the water, barely a ripple. I didn't tell her it was okay. It wasn't okay. It had never been okay, and I wasn't going to lie about that to make either of us feel better in a moment that didn't deserve a lie. But I reached across and put my hand on her knee for a second, just to say I heard you. I'm not gone. I'm giving the statement, Emily said, firm, decided. Whatever they throw at me, I don't care. He used your name, Sheila. He used your name after everything he already did to you, and I am not letting that stand. We sat on the step for a while longer, not talking, just sitting in the thin morning sun with the bay laid out in front of us and 8 years of distance slowly, very slowly, beginning to close. Then Mom appeared in the doorway behind us and said quietly that she'd made toast if we wanted it. And somehow that small, ordinary thing, toast on a Tuesday morning, made my eyes sting in a way that nothing else had. I didn't go inside straight away. I needed another minute with the bay and the pelicans and the quiet that was starting, just starting, to feel like something other than emptiness. Because the meeting with Dennis Chavez was in 2 days, and whatever understanding Emily and I had found on that step, it was about to be tested in ways neither of us were fully ready for.
Elizabeth had chosen a meeting room at her firm, neutral ground, she said, which I appreciated. Dennis Chavez's solicitor had agreed to the same terms, no recorded statements, no formal proceedings, just 2 people in a room who had both had their lives disrupted by the same man. I arrived early, sat with my folder of documents on the table in front of me, and drank a glass of water, and reminded myself that Dennis Chavez was not my enemy. He was a man who had lost money in a deal that had my name forged across it. His anger was legitimate. So was mine. He came in at 10 past the hour. 50s, solidly built, the kind of face that had probably been open and easy before something had hardened it. He looked at me the way people look at someone they've spent weeks building a picture of, checking what they see against what they imagined. His solicitor, a younger man in a tight suit whose name I immediately forgot, sat to his left.
Elizabeth sat to my right. The four of us arranged around a table like a negotiation, which I suppose it was. Dennis spoke first. "Your name is on documents that cost me $180,000. Not an accusation, exactly, more like he was reading a fact he needed acknowledged before anything else could happen." "Yes," I said, "it is, and I had no knowledge of those documents or those transactions until 4 days ago." I slid my folder across the table. Business registration records, tax returns, lease agreements, 7 years of a woman building something real, every page of it time-stamped and verifiable. Hunter Mendez accessed my personal documents from my family home in Dandenong after I was forced out of that home at 22. He used my identity to construct a paper investor who could be attached to deals he wanted to distance himself from. I was not present, not informed, not a participant. I was a name on a page that he stole. Dennis looked at the folder. Didn't open it yet, just looked at it. "He told me you were a silent partner, said you preferred not to be at meetings, that you were busy with another business. I thought it was odd, but he was confident, and the numbers looked right, and He stopped, set his jaw. "I trusted him." The words landed in the room with the particular weight of something a person had had to admit to themselves many times before they could say it out loud. "So did a lot of people," I said quietly, "including people who should have known better, including my own family." He looked up at me then. Something shifted behind his eyes. "Your family knew him?" "He was my sister's partner. He lived in my parents' house for 6 years." Dennis sat back in his chair, slow, like pieces were rearranging themselves behind his face. "He used the people closest to him," Dennis said, not to me, more to the room. "That's what he does," I said. We talked for another hour. Dennis asked questions and I answered them, not defensively, factually, the way Elizabeth had coached me to. His solicitor took notes. Elizabeth took notes. At some point, someone brought in coffee and we drank it, and the hard edges in the room softened. Not all the way, but enough. By the end, Dennis had opened the folder. He'd read through it enough to understand what he was looking at. He hadn't apologized for suspecting me. I hadn't expected him to, but when we stood up to leave, he held out his hand and said, "I want my money back from him, whatever that takes. If your solicitor and mine can find a way to build that case together, I'm in." I shook his hand. "So am I said. In the lift going down, Elizabeth looked at me with something that on a less composed person might have been called a smile. "That went better than I expected," she said. "He's a reasonable man. He just needed someone to be straight with him." I drove home along the Nepean Highway with the windows down and the autumn air coming through cold and clean. I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not relief, not yet. The case was still live, and my name was still in that file, but something adjacent to it. The particular feeling of having stood in a difficult room and held your ground and come out the other side still intact. My phone buzzed on the seat beside me. A text from a number I didn't recognize. I glanced at it at the next red light. It said, "This is Alfie, Hunter's brother. I think you and I need to talk. I have something that will end this faster than any solicitor can." The light turned green. I sat there a second longer than I should have, staring at the screen. Then I forwarded it straight to Elizabeth and kept driving.
Alfie Mendez was nothing like his brother. He was younger by 4 years, quieter by a lifetime. He worked as a marine mechanic in Geelong, and he had spent the better part of the last decade watching Hunter charm his way through rooms and leave wreckage behind him, and saying nothing because Hunter was family, and you don't do that to family, until the AFP knocked on Alfie's door too, asking questions about a storage unit registered in his name that Hunter had been using. That was the line Alfie drew.
We met at a cafe in Geelong on a Thursday morning. Elizabeth sat beside me. Alfie came alone. He ordered a flat white and put a USB drive on the table between us without saying anything and pushed it toward me. 4 years of emails, he said. Hunter used my old laptop when he visited. He never cleared the browser history, never logged out. I didn't look at it until 2 weeks ago. It's all there. The shell companies, the identity structures, the whole thing, including yours. Elizabeth picked up the drive carefully, like she already knew what it meant. Why are you giving this to us? I asked him, not suspicious, genuinely wanting to know. Alfie looked out the window at the street. A tram went past, slow and grinding. Because he put your name on it, he said. Someone who had nothing to do with any of it, someone he'd never even met. That's not ambition, that's just rotten. We shook hands and he left, didn't ask for anything in return, just got up, paid for his coffee, and walked out into the grey Geelong morning. The USB drive changed everything. Elizabeth submitted it to the AFP within 48 hours, combined with Emily's formal statement, which she gave 11 days later, sitting straight-backed in a government office in the CBD, her voice steady the entire way through, and Tasha's documentation. The case against Hunter expanded significantly. His defense team had built their strategy around reasonable doubt. The emails collapsed it. My name was formally removed from the investigation 6 weeks later. Elizabeth called me on a Friday afternoon to tell me, and I was standing in the kitchen making dinner, and I had to sit down on the floor because my legs just went. Mum found me there. She didn't ask what had happened. She just sat down on the floor beside me and put her arm around my shoulders, and we stayed like that for a while. The two of us on the kitchen tiles with the toaster boiling over on the stove, and neither of us moving to fix it. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't years of hurt undone in a moment, but it was something true. Two people in the same place at the same time, not running from each other anymore. That counted for something. Hunter was sentenced 4 months later, 7 years, non-parole of 5. The civil case Dennis Chavez brought, with our 2 solicitors working in parallel, resulted in a judgment against Hunter's remaining assets. It wouldn't recover everything Dennis lost, but it was something. And Tasha received a formal finding in her favor from the Fair Work Commission that she had been constructively dismissed in response to a valid complaint. The firm settled quietly and quickly. Mum and Dad stayed for 3 months. Then Dad's old business partner, a man named Jeff, who had quietly maintained respect for Dad even through everything, offered him part-time consulting work, and they found a small rental in Frankston 20 minutes away. Close enough to matter, far enough to be honest about where we all actually were. Emily stayed longer. She needed to. We were careful with each other in the way that people are when they are rebuilding something that broke badly, slowly, without rushing it, testing each beam before they put weight on it. Some mornings we drank coffee on the step and watched the bay and didn't say much. Some evenings we argued properly about real things, and that was its own kind of progress. She got a job at a firm in Frankston in the new year, found a flat share in March. The morning she moved out, she stood in the hallway with her bags and looked at me for a long moment. "I know I don't get to ask this," she said, "but are we going to be okay?" I thought about it, really thought, the way the question deserved. "I think we're going to be something," I said. "I don't know what yet, but something real." She nodded, picked up her bags, and then she hugged me, quickly, tightly, the way you hold on to something you know you almost lost for good, and walked out to her car. I stood at the door and watched her go. People ask me sometimes, colleagues, clients, the occasional journalist who finds the story, whether I regret opening the gate that day, whether I think I should have left them standing in the rain and been done with it. I understand the question. 8 years of silence, everything they did, everything they chose. There's a version of this story where I keep the gate shut and walk away clean, and that's the end. But here's what I know. I opened that gate because I was strong enough to, not because I owed them anything, not because the pain had stopped mattering, but because I had built something solid enough that I could afford to let difficult things inside them without being destroyed by them. That is not weakness. That is the whole point. I am Sheila Reeves. I was thrown out of a house at 22 with $60 and a bruise and told without words that I was not worth keeping. I built a life anyway. I built it carefully and stubbornly and on my own terms. And when the people who left me standing in a driveway came back with nothing left, I made them look at what I'd become before I decided what they deserved. Not revenge, something harder than that, something that required more of me than anger ever could. Tonight the bay is flat, and the kitchen light is on, and I am making dinner for one, which is not a sad thing, it is a peaceful thing, and I have learned the difference. Outside, the gate stands exactly as I left it, solid, mine. I decide who comes through it. I always will. That was never the ending. That was the whole story.